It is week 16. Hopefully you guys advanced in your fantasy football playoff matchup. Today we're going to break down some of the biggest waiver ads heading into week 16 fantasy football. Going to go over my top flex considerations, top 5 guys, and then some honorable mentions. Go over some quarterback plays because maybe some of you guys lost Patrick Mahomes or Geno Smith or whoever else. And then we'll go over some tight end streamers, and then I'll kind of just recap the mustache handcuffs list that I've been doing the last couple of weeks. So starting with the honorable mentions that just missed my top 5 flex plays, I'm going to go in ascending order here. We have Rashad Bateman, 29% rostered, quietly a top 36 play in PPR all season long. The problem is you haven't known when to start him. Pittsburgh is a tough matchup this week, but definitely a decent flyer. I just probably wouldn't trust him in that matchup. Kamani Vidal also just misses the list here. Led the Chargers with 67% of the snaps this past week, all of the receiving work. They play on Thursday night versus Denver. Definitely keep that in mind. It is a tough matchup, and the Chargers just have not run the ball very well. But Vidal, I wouldn't be shocked if he had a nice breakout game for the Chargers. Alexander Mattison, also kind of interesting because Sincere McCormick left last night's game with an ankle injury. Of course, the Raiders are a complete and utter dumpster fire, but him and Amir Abdullah at least will probably get some touches for running back desperate teams. And then Dameon Pierce, keep an eye on Joe Mixon's health status because he did hurt his ankle. Maybe that swells up and he misses week 16. Probably going to be fine, but just keep that in mind. If you have an extra bench spot, throw a flyer away on Dameon Pierce. So number 5 waiver addition for the week in terms of flex consideration, wide receiver and running back. I have Jalen Coker, who was 4% rostered for the Carolina Panthers. He went over 100 yards this past week versus Dallas, 32% of the targets in week 10. The last time he played before the bye week and the injury that he suffered, 23% of the targets this past week, the last 2 games that he has played. Xavier Legette is likely out this week and maybe even for week 17 as well, dealing with a groin injury, and Jalen Coker was second on the Panthers in terms of targets, in terms of route participation, behind Adam Thielen, and before his injury, like I said, he had good usage there. They have Arizona this week, an exploitable team and exploitable defense, so if you're looking for flex production, I think Jalen Coker is a half-decent option. Number 4 pickup on the week is Tyjae Spears, 45% rostered. He would be higher on this list if we knew the status of Tony Pollard's health, but Tony Pollard appeared to have re-aggravated the ankle injury that he entered Sunday's game with. Both fantasy doctors that I trust most of the time suggest that Pollard will likely be fine, but his practice status throughout the week will be really important. If Tyjae Spears is available in your league, they have a very easy set of matchups here against the Jaguars in week 17. And then this week, they have an easy matchup as well. So if Spears is available on your waiver wire, you don't have a player that you can drop, that's fine. But if you can afford to stash a guy, I think Spears is a great option. Spears is an elite handcuff, to be honest, because we saw him post a 27-point week. The second Tony Pollard deals with an injury, he is immediately involved. He had like 7 targets in that game. So Spears definitely a good option. He would be higher if I knew Tony Pollard would be out for week 16. I'd probably have him number 1. Kendre Miller, 16% rostered right now. Alvin Kamara suffered either a groin injury or an abductor injury. Not overly concerned with the longevity of that injury are most of the fantasy doctors that I could see. The diagnosis that I heard is that if it's an abductor injury, he'll probably miss week 16. If it's a groin injury, he could play through it. For now, Kendre Miller is a priority ad, but I don't know for sure if he is going to be the lead back for the New Orleans Saints as of this recording. The Saints are playing the Packers this week for the 20th ranked defense against fantasy running backs. Again, if you have fab budget, definitely blow it on a guy like Kendre Miller because there's only 2 weeks left in the season anyway, and he's a handcuff that could work into a starting role, especially if you need running back production. But just keep in mind that Kamara could end up playing through this injury. So a number 2 waiver addition, to me the best receiver available on the waiver wire is Jalen McMillan. He was my number 1 ad last week. I said you could start him right off of the waiver wire, and that worked out really well. He had 18.5 PPR points. He ended up scoring 2 touchdowns. He does have the Dallas Cowboys this week, which is a pretty easy matchup for the offense in general, but especially for wide receivers. Baker and Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator, are in their bags right now. We are finally seeing Jalen McMillan play at the level that he played at the University of Washington when healthy. He was a top 11 receiver in the 2024 class for me. I had him ranked very similarly to the likes of Xavier Legette and Keon Coleman and Adonai Mitchell and Ricky Pearsall, some of the guys that went a lot higher than him in the actual NFL draft. So I really liked McMillan, the prospect. He has looked really good the last 2 weeks, the 2 highest graded games of his season according to PFF. And I do think you can start him, especially with Dallas this week. You have Carolina in week 17. I do think that you have some pretty decent outs to be able to play this guy as a flex option. So my number one waiver addition on the slate, and this is only for the reason that I absolutely know his starter is out for the rest of the season. As I mentioned already, I think that both Kendre Miller and especially Tajay Spears would be ahead of this guy, and probably Dameon Pierce too, if Joe Mixon's injury is dealing with something severe. We have Jerome Ford for the Cleveland Browns. He is 43% rostered right now. Ford versus the Bengals and Dolphins the next two games, both offenses that can score points. I've been holding on to Ford all season in the Flock League, and it kind of just pisses me off that now that I don't have him, he's actually valuable. But Nick Chubb is out for the year. He broke his foot, basically. Jerome Ford is the best receiving back on the team in an offense that throws more than anybody in the league. I would imagine Jerome Ford is going to be a 60, 70, 80% snap share guy with Pierre Strong probably working in. I get that they're a bad team, but they're likely to trail in most games versus two good offenses with the Bengals and Dolphins the next two games. And Jerome Ford has 5 to 8 target upside. And as we just saw last week, he can break off a long touchdown every once in a while as well. So I like Jerome Ford as a pretty good pickup. Moving into the quarterback and tight end pickups for the week, if you guys need somebody. Of course, Mahomes got injured. If you guys are in super flex leagues too, I'm sure maybe Geno Smith was an interesting option for you. I am paying attention to this specifically for the Flock League because I have Patrick Mahomes on that team, and I'm trying not to win the toilet bowl here. So Aaron Rodgers versus the Los Angeles Rams, I think, is a good pickup. 37% rostered, dome game this week. He had 289 and 3 touchdowns against the Jaguars in week 15, and then 339 the week before passing. So I think Aaron Rodgers is playing a little bit better right now. It's a little bit too little too late for them, obviously, but I do think Aaron Rodgers is maybe playing for pride here. If he does end up retiring this season, he probably wants to go on a high note, or maybe he wants to come back with the Jets this week or this coming year after the season is over. And of course, Devontae Adams is starting to play really well, and Garrett Wilson had a touchdown and all that good stuff. So Caleb Williams, also a half decent pickup versus the Detroit Lions. I know he just had an atrocious game on Monday Night Football, but 26 fantasy points the last time he faced the Lions. The Lions are losing guys left, right, and center on their defense. It was already an exploitable pass defense to begin with. They lost another starting corner, Carlton Davis. They lost a defensive tackle. Like, their defense is basically all backups. So I think Caleb Williams should be able to get a little confidence boost here. He is at home instead of on the road versus Minnesota. That was a tough defense he was going up against, so it's kind of understandable. He had a difficult game, and also just like pressure has really bothered him this year. If you look at his worst games like Houston, Minnesota, some of those games have just been heavy pressure, and I don't think that's going to be an issue against the Detroit Lions because they have like their 7th string defensive tackles and defensive ends out there. So I think Caleb Williams is a good option this week. Matthew Stafford versus the New York Jets, also a half decent option. He had a stinker last week on Thursday night, but it was terrible weather. The Jets seem like a sneaky high scoring potential game environment. So both quarterbacks in that game I feel pretty good about. Tight end position, maybe David Njoku's hurt for you, whoever, Evan Ingram is hurt for you. Here are some guys that you could pick up and potentially play this week. Brenton Strange, Evan Ingram's replacement, 11 catches, 73 yards last week, and he plays the Las Vegas Raiders this week. So he is a decent option. He had great route participation. Mac Jones is not going to push the ball like crazy downfield. That is just such an ugly game that we have. Jacksonville versus the Raiders, that is a top 5 pick matchup that's going to determine a lot of draft order, but I do think Brenton Strange could catch some passes in that game. Dalton Schultz is an interesting option. Had 91% of the routes this past week because Cade Stover had his appendix taken out. I believe it was like Friday afternoon or Friday night. So if he's out yet again, I think Schultz, even though he didn't have a great game this past week, could have a good one against Kansas City this week. And we also have multiple Texans tight ends on IR right now. So it is pretty much Dalton Schultz and everybody else. And then Juwan Johnson, of course, Taysom Hill is out right now. He is the Green Bay Packers this week, and he has had 3 straight weeks of good usage since Taysom Hill's injury. So moving into a quick refresher on the stashes. Again, if you guys haven't seen last week's waiver video, the week before's waiver video, all you basically need to know is that you're stashing some of these handcuffs for starters because you want to line your bench with upside that could potentially hit your lineup into the final 2 weeks of the season. And also, too, you block your league mates from getting some of these players as well. So we've had a lot of hits since I started this video in week 14. We had Zach Charbonnet, Braylon Allen, Isaac Guerrero, now potentially Spears, Ford, Miller, and even potentially Dameon Pierce. So the reason we want to highlight these handcuffs is because the top tier handcuffs especially need to be rostered, Because if you're holding Wan'Dale Robinson or an extra quarterback or an extra tight end after you already have Lamar Jackson and Brock Bowers, there's really no reason to be holding players like that. Instead, you should drop those players for the RB1 upside territory guys. Tyler Algier if he's available, Trey Benson if he's available, Ray Davis if he's available. Obviously, Charbonnet and Warren probably likely rostered in your league, but those are the high-end handcuffs that we want to be rostering, because if James Conner goes down, if Bijan Robinson goes down, if James Cook goes down, those guys are going to end up winning people leagues. And again, if those guys aren't available, then you move on to the next territory with Blake Corum, with Tajay Spears, who I talked about, with Kenneth Gainwell, with Roshan Johnson, with Cam Akers, with Damian Pierce, so on and so forth. If you have extra bench spots available, don't be afraid to burn them on some of these guys, because you could end up with the next Rashad Penny or the next Sony Michel or the next league-winning running back handcuff. Tyler Algier had a good run towards the end of his rookie season as well. So definitely pay attention to that. If you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel if you guys are new around here, and be sure to check out everything we're doing over on Flock Fantasy. My rest of season rankings are now updated as of the David Montgomery injury, and also too, we have tons of Dynasty content coming out. Tomorrow we will be doing playoff best ball drafts over on Underdog, which is something that is so fun this time of year to get involved in the NFL playoffs, get some rooting interest in there. If your favorite team didn't make the playoffs this year, I promise you the playoff best ball tournaments are the best way to root for the NFL playoffs, and we will have a live stream tomorrow on that. I'll talk about some strategy. I'm going to build my playoff best ball master sheet, which talks about if you're drafting now, how, likely seeding and, playoff odds and Super Bowl odds. It's a really important tool to make sure that you're not wasting a lot of early entries, because there's an edge to drafting those teams before the playoff matchups are actually set, because you can get some nice discounts on some teams that go on a late run. The Bills last year being a good example of that. So if that interests you, pay attention to all of that coming up on the channel. Like I said, like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.